Hello everyone, I'm John from Kraft Music, and here with me today I have the Korg monologue monophonic analog synthesizer. For a great deal on monologue, please check out our bundles at craftmusic.com. An obvious shorthand way to describe the monologue would be as the younger sibling to Korg's minilogue 4-voice polysynth. And inasmuch as it is smaller, has fewer keys and fewer voices, and a lower price tag, that's not inaccurate as far as shorthand goes. It is similarly true, however, that you could say Monologue is a grown-up version of Korg's venerable monotribe analog rhythm station, especially since some of the unique features on Monologue that distinguish it from minilogue come directly from the monotribe. Neither description is perfect, however, nor really fair to Korg's talented engineers who have clearly given a lot of thought to how a modern monosynth should sound and behave. And as we'll see, Monologue has some unique features that aren't found on either the minilogue or the monotribe. Physically, it's not hard to see which of its progenitors Monologue most closely resembles, with the same angled metal top panel and real wood back as the minilogue. And I should mention here too that while I don't have them here physically to show you, I will be more than happy in post to fly in some still images and show you the 4 extra color options available for Monologue. Besides the classic silver that we're used to from the minilogue, Monologue is also available in gold, deep red, dark blue, and black. Across the back panel, Monologue has the exact same complement of ports and connectors as its older sibling, with a USB port for MIDI over USB, which does require a driver download, by the way, for both Mac and PC, 5-pin MIDI in and out, as well as 1/8-inch jacks for what Korg now calls audio sync with capital letters, which is the audio-based sync standard found in many Korg products, including Volcas and Electribes, the SQ1 step sequencer, and which made its debut in the monotribe. In addition to the 1/4-inch main mono audio output, Monologue also has a 1/4-inch external audio input, and this isn't here just for convenience or play-along functionality. The external audio input hits Monologue's signal path ahead of the filter, the VCA, and the new drive circuit. So there's opportunity here to blend external sounds with Monologue's internal synth engine, or even just to process external sounds through the aforementioned circuits if you've got, say, a digital synth or a soft synth that you'd like to run through a real analog filter. Monologue uses the same highly playable and universally acclaimed velocity-sensitive slim keys that we've seen previously on the Minilogue and the ARP Odyssey and the MS-20 Mini, only here Korg has made the interesting decision to run its 2-octave range from E to E rather than the typical C to C. They did this ostensibly to make it more approachable for guitar and bass players. Also inherited from Minilogue, we have the exact same super fast OLED screen with its distinctive oscilloscope functionality, which is a real boon for sound design, letting you see in real time the effects your various parameter tweaks have on the resultant waveform. Speaking of sound design and getting into Monologue's oscillator section here, another Minilogue feature brought over to Monologue that sort of goes hand in hand with the oscilloscope is the oscillator waveform shape parameter, which on the sawtooth and triangle waves will affect the complexity of the waveform, and which on the square wave will affect the duty cycle or pulse width. VCO2 has the same sawtooth and triangle wave shapes, but drops the square wave for a noise source, which can be handy for percussion sounds. And in addition to having a octave switch and a fine-tuning knob here to set its pitch offset from VCO1, it also has its own waveform shape parameter. There's also a switch here in the oscillator 2 section to engage either oscillator hard sync or ring modulation. Up next, we have a basic mixer section with independent control over the levels for the two oscillators. And then cutoff frequency and resonance controls for Monologue's new analog filter circuit. While it seems like a safe bet that it's at least based on the minilogue filter, the monologue filter is, in the words of Korg chief engineer Tatsuya Takahashi, edgier with more bite, and it does seem to have some distinctive sonic characteristics compared to the minilogue. As I mentioned, there are three envelope types. The first is a basic attack decay. The second is an attack gate decay with the middle gate section lasting for as long as you hold down a key. And then you might be wondering what this funny symbol here is. And in the third mode, the amp is simply opened or gated as indicated by the square wave shaped bracket going around the whole symbol there, while a simple attack decay envelope will be applied to your selected secondary target. As you can see, in addition to these attack and decay knobs, there's an intensity knob here. And while Korg doesn't say this specifically in the manual, the behavior seems to be that the envelope is applied to the amp in a uniform way or always at full intensity, while the intensity knob will dial in how much the envelope is applied to your selected secondary target parameter. Here's a hot tip. While the intensity knob isn't a bipolar control with clockwise turns going into positive values and counterclockwise into negative territory, you can invert the envelope by holding Shift and turning the knob, which I'm not quite sure how to say this, will dial in higher and higher negative values or increase the intensity with which an inverted version of the envelope will be applied to your target parameter. So here it is in normal positive intensity mode. And then again, if I hold Shift, we can push it into negative numbers and invert the envelope. So while it isn't a true bipolar control with sort of 0 at noon, you can get into negative territory and apply inverted envelopes to your target parameters. Moving on to the LFO, here's where we really start to see monotribe's influence. There are 3 target parameters for the LFO. There's one for pitch, one for the oscillator waveform shape parameter, and one for filter cutoff. There are 3 LFO shapes. There's a sawtooth or reverse ramp, a triangle, and a square wave. And then there are 3 LFO modes. Slow mode will give you the typical LFO behavior that we just heard with a speed up to 28 Hertz. And then one-shot mode has the same frequency range as slow mode, but the LFO will reset its phase with each key press and will stop after half a cycle. This can be thought of and used almost as an extra envelope and can be particularly handy when you're synthesizing percussion sounds. And then there's fast mode. And while it isn't quite as fast as Monotribe's fast mode, topping out at just under 3 kilohertz compared to Monotribe's top limit of 5, audio rate is generally considered to be anything above 20 hertz. So even the slow LFO starts to get into there, and with fast mode you get well into audio rate and filter FM territory. And one of the interesting characteristics of the filter is that if you modulate it with the fast LFO at audio rates and dial in a sweet spot here on the resonance just shy of self-oscillation, then sweeping the cutoff frequency will give you these great formant type mouthy sounds. Monologue sequencer has been overhauled quite a bit compared to minilogue, with the most obvious difference being the 16 step buttons, so that you don't have to hold down shift to address steps 9 to 16 like you did with minilogue and its 8 step buttons. Sequences can be entered in step mode, sort of XOX style, or you can play them in real time, though it's worth pointing out that no matter how expressively or sloppily you play in your sequence, Monologue will, for better or worse, snap all those notes to the 16th note grid with no real option to play back your sequence exactly as you played it in. There's also this 3-position sequencer mode switch here, with the first position letting you edit the notes in your sequence. And then the second position is a slide view, which is great if you're used to 303 style per step glide programming. Finally, there's a dedicated motion sequencing mode. Like the minilogue, monologue has 4 motion sequencing lanes, and while minilogue did have a rough graphical display that showed you the values in those 4 lanes over time, it's a little more immediately accessible here on monologue, where switching into motion mode will immediately show you those values on the screen. Much like the notes in your sequence, motion sequences can be recorded in real time by running the sequencer in record mode and then turning knobs and flipping switches, or they can be entered in step mode for per step parameter lock style motion sequences. If you record in real time, unlike recording note steps, all the idiosyncrasies of your performance will be retained, and there's even a motion smoothing mode that can be engaged individually for each of the 4 motion sequence lanes that will smooth out any jaggedy or steppy parts of your motion sequence. Once you've recorded a sequence and are playing it back, you can turn individual steps on and off using the step buttons. This doesn't mean that those steps will be skipped or that you'll change the actual step length of your sequence, just that those steps won't sound as the playback head passes over them. And then, as you could see, when I re-enabled disabled steps, they remembered the note values that had been put in as part of the original sequence. Another great addition to the sequencer is this big key trigger / hold button here. This lets you take a sequence you've recorded and play it back by holding down keys on the keyboard. This lets you transpose a sequence across the entire keyboard and the full 5-octave range. And while the default behavior is what you just saw there, where a sequence will play back for as long as I hold down a key, if I hold down this button until it blinks, it goes into an alternate mode, where the first key press will engage the sequencer, and then subsequent presses will transpose the sequence while the playback stays on tempo. Something else this allows you to do is record a simple 1-note sequence with some motion sequencing information, and then use the key trigger / hold button to essentially play back the motion sequences. So I'll put in just a simple ersatz sample and hold, or stepped LFO, random LFO pattern here on the filter cutoff, and then record just a single note at the beginning of the sequence. And then if I play that back with the key trig / hold button, when we started our little top panel tour here, we skipped right past the new drive knob that's over here under the master volume. And that's partly because of the drive circuit's position at the very end of monologue's signal path. After whatever you've done with your oscillators goes through the mixer and amp and gets modulated by the LFOs, at the very end, before the output, it goes through the new drive circuit, which isn't too extreme, but just overdrives the signal a little bit to bring out some extra harmonics and add a little distortion. Monologue does have some under-the-hood settings in its edit modes, including per-patch portamento settings, which are separate from the per-step sequencer glide we talked about before. And then there are also assignments for our bendy pal here with 16 available targets, including not just pitch bend and mod depth, but also individual oscillator tuning, individual oscillator waveform shape complexity, filter cutoff and resonance, all 3 envelope controls, LFO rate, and more. Other per-program settings include the ability to sync the LFO to clock with various clock-divided values then available on the rate knob, control over filter key tracking with settings for half and full tracking, the extent to which keyboard velocity will affect filter cutoff and amp level, and finally, one of the biggest new features to be added to Monologue, microtuning and the ability to use alternate tuning scales. While conceptually this isn't rocket science or particularly hard to wrap your head around, it's worth stopping here to really explain it. Practically every keyboard, synthesizer, soft synth is set up to use the same tuning setup that we're used to from a piano, which is called 12-tone equal temperament, or 12-tet, where you've got your 12 notes in an octave that are all separated by the same tuning interval. This is what we're all used to in Western music, but there are other tuning scales that use different or irregular intervals that have been developed in different cultures or at different points in history for different purposes, sometimes for specific instruments like tuning a harpsichord, or sometimes for different compositional goals like keeping major chords perfectly tuned or allowing for easy transposition. Included as presets in Monologue are some ancient Greek scales, Baroque period scales, Indonesian gamelan scales, and a variety of other sort of defined and known alternate tunings from different cultures or historical periods, as well as 6 alternate tunings contributed by Aphex Twin. Aphex Twin has long experimented with microtuning and alternate tuning scales going all the way back to selected ambient works. And it's particularly apparent on Cyro, his latest full-length, due to his extensive use of the Sequentic Circlon sequencer originally introduced in 2010. It's the reason that you see Circlon showing up in a lot of his recent track titles. If you dig into the Cyro gear matrix that he published, you can see it being used on a lot of the individual tracks, and it's really not to be underestimated as a big part of the Aphex Twin special sauce, or the reason his music is so often described as alien or otherworldly. If you pick one of your favorite melodies on Cyro and try to play it on a piano or sequencer, more than likely you can't, and that's due to his extensive use of the microtuning capabilities of the Circlon and his coming up with alternate scales that don't hew to 12-tet. So with that primer, Monologue supports microtuning, where you can go in and adjust in sense the individual pitches for up to 4 keys or notes at a time, and then you can either adjust the pitches for the full range of available notes, or you can set up what's called a user octave, where you adjust the pitches for the 12 notes in an octave, and then that octave will be repeated across all the available range. Up to 6 user scales and 6 user octaves can be saved as alternate tuning presets, and then at the patch or program level, you can assign any of your user tunings or any of Monologue's preset alternate tunings to every patch that you save. Speaking of which, there are 100 program storage locations on Monologue, 80 of which come pre-populated with factory presets, though those can be overwritten and then later restored if you so desire. Of those 80 presets, 30 are by Aphex Twin, and most or all of them use his alternate tuning scales. Just to briefly mention some of the other under-the-hood features in Monologue's edit modes, at the sequence level, you can set your sequence length to numbers less than 16. You can, much like on the minilogue, you can set the step resolution to values less than the default 16th note, and you can also set individual swing and gate time per sequence. In the global edit menu, you'll find many of the parameters you'd expect for things like master tuning and transpose to change how knobs behave when they don't match preset values. Choose among 8 different velocity curves or disable velocity altogether. You can change the polarity of the audio sync and then set various MIDI-related parameters, including channel, clock source, transport, send and receive, and choose whether you're sending and receiving MIDI over the 5-pin MIDI jacks or USB port or both. And while we're talking about MIDI, Monologue, like Minilogue, has a full MIDI implementation with CC values for all the synthesis parameters, as well as support for SysEx, including the ability not just to dump all the internal data, but also to individually export your custom tuning user scales and user octaves. I almost forgot to mention that one more thing inherited from Monotribe is that Monologue can be battery powered. It doesn't have an internal speaker like Monotribe, but it's pretty portable, and with some headphones plugged in, it lets you be creative on the go, whether that's in the park or subways and trains seem to be popular, at least in product marketing videos. Korg gives you a set of batteries in the box, but does not include a power supply. Don't worry though, because Kraft Music has you covered with our exclusive power kit bundles that do include the official Korg compatible power supply. So that's the Korg monologue, and we hope it's clear by now that, similar name and appearance aside, it's quite a bit more than just a scaled down minilogue with its drive circuit, tweaked filter, beefed up sequencer, monotribe LFO options, and support for microtuning. Once again, for a great deal on Monologue, including the option to buy it with a power supply, please check out our bundles at craftmusic.com. My name is John. Thank you for watching.